I barely opened the door when Marla barged in, a cloud of smoke trailing behind her. "Mom, we're moving in with you," she declared, flicking her cigarette butt onto my pristine porch. Before I could respond, 3 cars pulled up and a whirlwind of chaos descended. Clyde, Marla's husband, hopped out of the first car, barking orders at Elijah and Sophia to grab their belongings. Little Lucas trailed behind, clutching a tattered stuffed animal. "What's going on?" I asked, bewildered by the sudden intrusion. Marla thrust a crumpled eviction notice into my hands. "We got kicked out. This place is a dump anyway." I surveyed the scene, suitcases spilling onto my meticulously kept lawn, the kids bickering, and Clyde's face etched with a scowl. A knot formed in my stomach as I realized this was no ordinary visit. "You can't just barge in like this," I protested, but my words fell on deaf ears. Elijah brushed past me, his sneakers leaving muddy tracks across the foyer. "This place is lame, Grandma." Sophia at least offered an apologetic shrug before disappearing upstairs with her bags. In a whirlwind, my peaceful abode had transformed into a circus tent, and I was the reluctant ringleader. As I watched Marla and Clyde argue over whose turn it was to unload the cars, a nagging feeling crept over me. Something wasn't right. That night, as the chaos subsided and the house settled into an uneasy silence, I couldn't shake the sense that Marla was hiding something. Her evasive glances and Clyde's sullen demeanor hinted at a deeper issue beneath the surface. I knew better than to confront them directly. Marla had always been a master at deflection, and Clyde's temper was legendary. For now, I would bide my time, observing their every move and unraveling the mystery that had landed them on my doorstep. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a battle for my home and my independence. In the days that followed, Marla and Clyde wasted no time making themselves at home, and I use that term loosely. They treated my house like a cheap motel, leaving trails of mess wherever they went. Empty beer cans littered the coffee tables, and cigarette butts overflowed from every ashtray. "Hey, Grandma!" Elijah would holler from the living room, his voice dripping with disrespect. "We're out of chips. Go grab some more." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that confrontation would only escalate the situation. Still, it grated on me to see my once pristine home desecrated by their laziness and entitlement. Worse still, Marla began meddling in my finances. One afternoon, I caught her rifling through my mail, discarding bills and statements into a growing pile. "What are you doing?" I asked, my heart pounding. She barely looked up. "Just taking care of things. Mom, you don't need to worry about this stuff anymore." Before I could protest, Clyde lumbered into the room, his massive frame filling the doorway. "Marla's right. We're handling it from now on." His tone left no room for argument, and a sick feeling twisted in my gut. I knew then that their motives extended far beyond a temporary place to stay. Evenings were the worst. While the kids zoned out in front of the TV, Marla and Clyde would hole up in the den, their voices carrying through the thin walls in heated whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Anger, desperation, and something darker lurking beneath. One night, I caught a snippet of their conversation as I passed by the den. "Can't keep living like this," Marla hissed. "We need to figure something out, and fast." Clyde's reply was muffled, but I heard my name mentioned, followed by a bitter laugh from Marla. In that moment, the pieces began to fall into place. Their sudden arrival, the blatant disrespect, the insistence on controlling my finances, it was all part of a larger scheme, one that threatened to strip me of everything I'd worked so hard for. As I lay awake that night, my mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. One thing was certain, I couldn't let this continue. Marla and Clyde had crossed a line, and it was time for me to take a stand, no matter the cost. The tension in the house was palpable, like a tightly coiled snake ready to strike. I did my best to avoid Marla and Clyde, retreating to my bedroom whenever possible. But it was only a matter of time before the inevitable confrontation. It happened one morning as I was sorting through the mail, a task Marla had deemed unnecessary for me. My heart sank as I flipped through the envelopes, credit card statements, loan applications, all in my name but with unfamiliar account numbers. "Marla!" I called out, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "What is the meaning of this?" She sauntered into the room, a self-satisfied smirk plastered across her face. "Just taking care of things, Mom. You know how forgetful you can be." "These accounts aren't mine," I shot back, waving the papers in her face. "You've been opening lines of credit in my name without my permission." Clyde appeared in the doorway, his massive arms folded across his chest. "Relax, Renee. We're just trying to help." "Help?" I sputtered. "This is fraud, pure and simple." Marla's expression hardened, the smugness giving way to cold calculation. "We're a family, Mom. What's yours is ours. Or have you forgotten how much we've sacrificed for you over the years?" I opened my mouth to protest, but she barreled on, her words laced with venom. "You think it was easy, taking care of your ungrateful ass all those years after Dad died? The least you can do is let us handle the finances for a change." Clyde stepped forward, his bulk radiating menace. "She's right, Renee. We've got mouths to feed, and you're sitting on a gold mine with this place. It's time you started pulling your weight." My heart pounded in my ears as the full weight of their scheme hit me. They weren't just mooching off me, they were systematically draining me dry, using my own finances as their personal slush fund. "You're bleeding me dry," I whispered, hot tears stinging my eyes. My own daughter, taking advantage of me like this. Marla's laugh was devoid of humor. "Don't act so surprised, Mom. You knew this day would come. Now, are you going to play nice, or do we have to get ugly?" As I stared into her cold, calculating eyes, I realized there was no reasoning with her. The daughter I had raised, the little girl I had loved and nurtured, was gone. In her place stood a remorseless monster willing to sacrifice her own flesh and blood for her selfish desires. In that moment, something hardened within me. If Marla wanted ugly, I would show her just how ferocious a mother's love could be when pushed to the brink. This was war, and I had no intention of losing my home, my money, or what little dignity I had left. One way or another, I would make them pay for their betrayal, even if it meant losing everything in the process. After the confrontation about the fraudulent accounts, the atmosphere in the house grew even more toxic. Marla and Clyde made no attempt to hide their disdain for me, openly mocking my feeble protests and flaunting their disrespect. "This is our house now, old lady," Elijah sneered as he tracked mud across the pristine living room carpet. "Get used to it." I wanted to scream, to lash out at their entitled behavior, but years of conditioning had taught me to swallow my rage. Still, a simmering resentment burned within me, fueled by Marla's outright betrayal. The final straw came one Friday night when I returned home from running errands. Music thumped from inside the house, the bass vibrating the windows. I braced myself, pushing open the door to a scene of pure chaos. Bodies writhed on the makeshift dance floor that was once my living room. Empty bottles and crushed beer cans littered every surface, the stench of stale booze and marijuana hanging thick in the air. In the midst of it all, Marla and Clyde presided like demented monarchs, hollering and cackling as their so-called friends trashed my home. "Mom," Marla slurred, catching sight of me. "Come join the party." A wave of nausea washed over me as I surveyed the destruction, my beloved home reduced to a frat house squat. Suddenly, I could no longer contain the rage that had been simmering for weeks. "Get out!" I screamed, my voice cracking with fury. "All of you, get out of my house right now!" The revelers fell silent, staring at me with a mixture of confusion and contempt. Marla's face contorted in an ugly sneer. "Or what, Mom? You gonna call the cops on your own daughter?" Clyde lumbered toward me, his meaty fists clenched. "You heard her, Renee. This is our place now. Time for you to step aside and let the adults handle things." In that moment, something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and resentment came pouring out in a torrent of unbridled fury. "How dare you!" I raged, my voice ricocheting off the walls. "This is my home, my sanctuary, and you've turned it into a cesspool of filth and depravity." Marla's eyes widened, the alcohol-fueled bravado faltering for just an instant. I pressed on, heedless of the stunned onlookers. "I've indulged your parasitic lifestyle for too long, Marla. But no more. You want to act like entitled brats, be my guest, but not under my roof." Clyde stepped forward, his bulk looming over me. "You don't got the balls, Renee. We ain't going anywhere." I met his glare with steely resolve, my mind made up. "Then you leave me no choice." Turning on my heel, I stormed out of the house, my hands trembling with equal parts rage and determination. They thought they could bully me, take advantage of my kindness and hospitality. Well, They were about to learn just how far a mother would go to protect what was rightfully hers. This was the proverbial gloves-off moment, and I intended to hit them where it hurt most. I knew confronting Marla and Clyde directly would be a waste of time. They were too far gone, too consumed by their own greed and selfishness, to listen to reason. No, if I wanted to reclaim what was rightfully mine, I needed to take drastic action. The next morning, I slipped out before dawn and headed to the city. I had an appointment with a lawyer, one recommended by a friend who had gone through her own messy divorce. Her name was Susan, and from the moment I stepped into her office, I knew I was in capable hands. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. I laid it all out. The sudden arrival, the financial exploitation, the destruction of my home. With each sordid detail, Susan's expression grew more grave. "Your daughter and son-in-law have committed several serious crimes," she said once I'd finished. "Identity theft, fraud, damage to property. We have more than enough to pursue legal action." Relief washed over me. Finally, someone who understood the gravity of the situation, who could help me fight back against Marla's depravity. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my resolve hardening. Susan outlined a plan of attack. First, we would file a report with the police regarding the stolen finances and identity theft. Then she would help me draft a formal eviction notice, giving Marla and Clyde a hard deadline to vacate the premises. "And if they refuse?" I asked, thinking of Clyde's hulking frame and menacing glare. Susan's smile was razor-thin. "Then we pursue a restraining order and have the authorities remove them forcibly. But I have a feeling, once the legal proceedings start, they'll be more cooperative." I nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over me. For too long, I had allowed Marla to walk all over me, to take and take without consequence. Well, those days were over. On the drive home, I made one more stop, pulling up to the local police station. A kind-faced officer named Mitchell took my statement, his brow furrowing as I recounted the litany of crimes Marla and Clyde had committed. "We'll open an investigation right away, ma'am," he assured me. "And if you feel unsafe at any point, don't hesitate to call us." With the wheels in motion, I returned home, my hands shaking with a mixture of nerves and righteous fury. Marla and Clyde were lounging on the porch, nursing hangovers from the previous night's debauchery. "Where the hell have you been?" Marla slurred, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. "Enough is enough," I said, my voice ringing with certainty. "You've taken advantage of me for the last time." Clyde sat up, his beefy frame radiating menace. "Watch your mouth, old lady." But I wasn't cowed, not anymore. "I've filed a report with the police, and I have a lawyer working on eviction papers as we speak. You and your deadbeat husband have 30 days to get out of my house, or you'll be forcibly removed." Marla's jaw dropped, her lips working soundlessly. Clyde surged to his feet, his fists clenching. "You can't do that," he roared. "This is our home now." I met his gaze unflinchingly. "No, Clyde, this is my home, and I'm taking it back one way or another. The free ride is over." As the gravity of my words sank in, twin expressions of shock and outrage contorted their faces. But I was past caring about their hurt feelings or misplaced indignation. They had brought this reckoning upon themselves, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. No more playing the victim. No more casting myself as the long-suffering martyr. This time, I was the one calling the shots, and if they didn't like it, tough luck. The gauntlet had been thrown, and the battle lines were drawn. May the best woman win. The fallout from my ultimatum was swift and ugly. Marla and Clyde reacted with outrage, as if they were the wronged parties in this twisted saga. "You can't do this to us," Marla screeched, her face contorted with rage. "We're family." Clyde loomed over me, his massive frame radiating menace. "You're gonna regret this, you old bat. We ain't going nowhere." I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated. "The decision is made. You have 30 days to get out, or the authorities will remove you." "Over my dead body," Clyde snarled, leaning in until I could smell the stale beer on his breath. Marla stepped between us, her eyes blazing. "You think you're so high and mighty, Mom? Well, let me tell you something. You're nothing without us. We've sacrificed everything to take care of your sorry ass." I laughed, a bitter bark of derision. "Take care of me? Is that what you call stealing my money and trashing my home?" "It's our money," she shot back. Our home. You owe us after everything we've done. The delusional entitlement, the utter lack of remorse, it was all so quintessentially Marla. She had always been a master of manipulation, twisting the narrative to cast herself as the victim. I don't owe you a damn thing, I said, my voice low and steady, especially not after you committed fraud and identity theft in my name. Marla's eyes widened, her bravado faltering for a moment. You don't have any proof. Don't I? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the eviction notice, freshly printed. I have a paper trail a mile long, and the police are already investigating you two. Clyde's face purpled with rage. You called the cops? On your own kid? Before I could respond, the front door burst open, and 2 uniformed officers strode in. Mitchell and his partner, a no-nonsense woman named Sanchez. Everything okay here, ma'am? Mitchell asked, his gaze sweeping over the charged scene. I nodded, gesturing towards Marla and Clyde. Just informing these 2 of the eviction notice. They've overstayed their welcome. Sanchez stepped forward, her hand resting on her utility belt. We received the report about the identity theft and financial crimes. I suggest you cooperate and vacate the premises peacefully. Marla's mouth worked soundlessly, all her bluster evaporating in the face of police intervention. Clyde, however, was having none of it. This is our house, he bellowed, rounding on me with menacing intensity. You hear me, you miserable old crone? We ain't going nowhere. In a flash, Mitchell and Sanchez were on him, twisting his arms behind his back and slamming him against the wall. That's enough out of you, Sanchez growled as she slapped cuffs on Clyde's wrists. You're under arrest for threatening behavior and possible financial crimes. I watched, numb with shock, as they hauled a raging Clyde out to the squad car. Marla shrank back, her hands covering her mouth as the weight of her actions finally hit home. You'll regret this, Mom, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. We're still family, damn it! But I just shook my head, suddenly drained of all emotion. The lines had been drawn, the battle fought, and I had emerged victorious, if utterly spent. As the police car pulled away, I turned and surveyed the wreckage of my once pristine home. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Repairing the damage, rebuilding my life after this cataclysmic betrayal. But I had taken the first step, striking back against those who had sought to bleed me dry. This was just the beginning. The hard work of reclaiming my autonomy, my sense of self-worth, still lay ahead. But I was ready, emboldened by the knowledge that I had stood my ground against those I once loved most. Sometimes the only way to mend a broken family is to burn it all down and start anew from the ashes. And as I closed the front door on that shambled chapter of my life, I knew that was exactly what I intended to do. The legal proceedings against Marla and Clyde moved swiftly, like a runaway train I was powerless to stop. Not that I wanted to. They had brought this reckoning upon themselves through their own greed and depravity. I watched from the courtroom gallery as the charges were read aloud: identity theft, fraud, financial crimes. Marla kept her head down, her shoulders slumped in defeat, but Clyde glowered at me from the defendant's table, his eyes burning with impotent rage. The evidence was damning: stolen credit card statements, illicit loan applications, all bearing my name and personal information. As the prosecutor methodically laid out the case, I saw the weight of realization settling over Marla. Her betrayal, once so glib and self-assured, now hung around her neck like a millstone. When called to the stand, I recounted the nightmare of her arrival, the slow erosion of my autonomy as they leached off my finances. Each sordid detail felt like a dagger to the heart, but I pressed on, determined to see justice served. She was my own daughter, I said, my voice wavering, and she bled me dry without a second thought. In the end, the verdict was inevitable: guilty on all counts. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, Marla finally met my gaze, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Mom," she mouthed, the words barely audible. "I'm so sorry." But the apology, as insincere as it was, rang hollow. Sorry wouldn't undo the months of torment, the utter desecration of my home and security. There are some sins that can never be forgiven, and Marla's betrayal cut too deep. In the aftermath, I tried to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt tainted by the memories of their occupation. Every room echoed with the ghost of Marla's cruelty, of Clyde's menacing presence. So I made the difficult decision to sell. A clean break, a chance to start anew without the albatross of anguish weighing me down. As the moving truck pulled away from the curb, I took one last look at the place that had been my home for over 30 years. So many milestones, so many memories, my wedding, Marla's childhood, the long, lonely nights after losing my husband. It all felt like a lifetime ago, another reality entirely. The house found a new owner, a young couple just starting their own family. I hope they cherish it, I thought, pulling away. I hope they never know the depths of heartbreak I endured beneath that roof. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild, to recapture some semblance of normalcy. But Marla's betrayal had irrevocably altered me. The trust, the blind devotion a mother feels for her child, it had been shattered beyond repair. I forced myself to attend the court-mandated family therapy sessions, more for the sake of the grandchildren than any vain hope of reconciliation. Seeing Marla reduced to this broken, hollow specter was a harsh reminder of how far we had fallen. "I never meant for things to go this far," she said woodenly during one session, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I made mistakes, horrible mistakes, but you have to believe, I never stopped loving you, Mom." I said nothing, unable to meet her eyes. Because deep down, I knew the truth. The daughter I loved had been devoured by her own selfish impulses long ago. What sat before me was a husk, a cautionary tale of what happens when the sins of the child outweigh the unconditional love of the parent. In the end, I decided to keep my distance, to forge ahead with my new life unburdened by the baggage of her deceit. The grandchildren, mercifully shielded from the worst of the fallout, would still have a path to reconnect when they were older, wiser. As for Marla and Clyde, I feared that bridge had been burned irreparably. Sometimes, the only way to heal is to cauterize the wound entirely. And as I settled into my new home, a cozy little bungalow in a peaceful neighborhood, I felt a profound sense of release. The old me, the one who had endured such anguish and exploitation, could finally be laid to rest. In her place stood a woman reborn, hardened by the brutal lesson that even blood can be poisoned by greed and disloyalty. It was a harsh reality, but one I had survived through grit and an unwavering commitment to justice. And if nothing else, I could take solace in the fact that Marla's cosmic debt had finally, brutally been paid. The sale of my family home was a cathartic, if bittersweet, experience. As I signed the final paperwork and handed over the keys, a weight lifted from my shoulders, the weight of decades' worth of memories both cherished and haunted. No longer would I be tethered to that place, to the ghost of Marla's betrayal that lingered in every room. It was time to build a new life, one unburdened by the specter of her greed and entitlement. I found a cozy little bungalow in a quiet neighborhood, a world away from the chaos and turmoil of my former existence. Unpacking those first few boxes, setting up my new sanctuary, I felt a sense of rebirth wash over me. This was my chance to redefine myself, to shed the skin of victimhood that Marla had forced upon me. No more would I be the long-suffering martyr, enduring abuse and disrespect in the name of family obligation. As the weeks passed, I settled into a routine, tending to my little garden out front, taking evening strolls through the tree-lined streets, savoring the tranquility that had been so cruelly ripped away. Slowly but surely, the open wounds began to scar over, replaced by a newfound sense of agency and self-worth. Of course, Marla and Clyde's shadows still loomed large, an ever-present specter refusing to dissipate entirely. I forced myself to attend the court-mandated family therapy sessions, more for the grandchildren's sake than any vain hope of reconciliation. Seeing Marla in that sterile visitation room, her fire extinguished and her bravado reduced to hollow contrition, was a sobering reminder of how far we had fallen. The daughter I had loved, nurtured, sacrificed for, she was long gone, devoured by her own selfish impulses. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she would mumble, her gaze downcast. "I never meant for things to spiral this far out of control." Her apologies rang hollow, empty platitudes uttered in a desperate bid for leniency. Because the truth was, she had made her choices, heedless of the collateral damage to me and her own children. "Save it," I said flatly during one particularly draining session. "Your sorries mean nothing to me now." Clyde, at least, had the good sense to remain silent, his bulk radiating sullen resentment from the opposite side of the visitation table. In his glowering silence, I saw the depth of his anger, his impotent rage at having been outwitted and outmaneuvered. The grandchildren, mercifully, seemed to be weathering the storm as well as could be expected. Little Lucas, always the free spirit, quickly adapted to his new surroundings and routine of after-school visits. Sophia, ever the sensitive soul, withdrew into herself, haunted eyes hinting at deeper traumas left unspoken. And Elijah? Elijah remained a defiant force, his thinly veiled hostility a mirror image of his father's bitter discontent. More than once, I had to intervene as he spouted vitriol and profanity, lashing out at the upheaval that had shaken his world. "This is all your fault, you vindictive old bat," he shouted during one particularly explosive meltdown, his face contorted with adolescent rage. "If you hadn't betrayed us, none of this would have happened." In moments like those, it was all I could do not to unleash my own fury, to shake him until he understood the depravity of his parents' actions. But I remained steadfast, reminding myself that he was the victim in all this, a pawn in Marla and Clyde's sick game of exploitation. As the years rolled on, the grandchildren grew, evolved, forged their own paths forward, some rockier than others. Elijah, consumed by anger and rebellion, carved a trail of petty crimes and wasted potential. Sophia found solace in her studies, escaping into the safe haven of academia. And Lucas was my beacon of hope. Even as the world turned upside down around him, his gentle spirit remained untarnished by the sins of his parents. He embraced me with a warmth and openness that Marla had long since shuddered, an enduring reminder that love could conquer even the cruelest of betrayals. In those twilight years, as I watched my new beginnings bloom with each passing season, I took solace in knowing that I had dealt the deadliest blow, not through violence or malice, but by reclaiming my autonomy, my very sense of self. Marla and Clyde had sought to sap me of my finances, my independence, my soul. But in the end, it was I who emerged victorious, rising phoenix-like from the ashes of their duplicity. My home was no longer a gilded cage, but a sanctuary of healing and rebirth. If they could not appreciate the depth of a mother's love, so be it. That was their cosmic arrogance to bear. As for me, I had rediscovered the unshakable truth that one's family is not dictated by blood, but by the bonds forged through compassion, integrity, and an inviolable sense of justice. And in that truth I had found the ultimate deliverance.